All right, we are live. Another edition of Fixture Focus here on American Hammers Network. As always, I'm your host, Justin Wasik, and today we're joined by a very, very special guest, Mr. Ian Cheeseman. Um, Ian has seen over 2,000 competitive matches of Manchester City's. He's commented on City games as early as the 80s. He's been on Club Call, ex-BBC, um, radio as well, Manchester Radio, I believe. Um, was voted the Northwest Football Journalist of the Year in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. Author of multiple books, including Best Job in the World. And currently, he has a YouTube channel called Ian Cheeseman, Forever Blue. Ian, thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate the time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Always good to speak to fellow football fans.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why I really enjoy doing this show, because there's only so many times you can sort of beat the same drum about West Ham and like GSB out and over and say the same thing over and over and over again. It's always nice to talk to well established media pundits from other teams. So I really enjoyed the chance to do that. And speaking of your team, Manchester City, um, sounds like, I mean, you're born and bred. I never know how to pronounce it. Is it Mancunian? Is that how you say it?
Mancunian.
Mancunian. Okay, Mancunian. Born and bred in Manchester, so you've been a City fan all your life. Um, Talk to me. I'm interested in sort of your first City memory, because obviously, for a lot of the young fans, today's Manchester City was not the Manchester City of old. So what were your sort of first memories as a fan of City?
Well, this is going to make me sound very old, obviously, which I am, I suppose. But the first game I attended was back in 1970. It was a semi-final of a European competition as well. It was the European Cup Winners' Cup, which, as the name suggests, you had to have won your domestic cup to qualify for.
Right.
City went on to win that tournament. I'd been a City fan longer than that. I was 10 years old at the time, and I was wanting to go to games. But the world was very different back then. And although some of my compatriots did go to games when they were quite young, my mum and dad were pretty protective. So I wasn't really allowed to go. And this match, the first one, 15th of April 1970, was City against a team called Schalke from Germany, which I know you'll know them these days, but back then they weren't really particularly well known in this country. And my mum was German, and my mum came from Gelsenkirchen, where Schalke were from. And she hadn't wanted me to go to a match, but she said to me that when this game came around and they were playing Schalke, that a relative of ours was coming over as a tour guide with some Schalke fans, somebody that she knew very, very well, and was hoping that he would use this as an opportunity to come and visit us. And because his time was limited and he wanted to be very conscientious and see the fans in through the turnstiles and meet them after the game, he said to her, and I'm listening to the half of this conversation, and he says, the only way you're actually going to see me is if you go to the game yourself. And I'm thought, yes, finally I get to go to a game. So I sit there in the Platt Lane end, one of the old stands at Main Road. I'm there with my mum and dad, with my uncle and another relative of mine. And although they were just talking all the way through the game, I'm transfixed by watching Colin Bell, my boyhood hero, Mike Doyle, Neil Young, players like that, who were great players back then. And City were a great team back then. They'd won the league in 68. They'd won the FA Cup in 69. And that season, as I said, they went on to win the European Cup Winners' Cup and the League Cup. So 4 trophies in 3 seasons. I wasn't a glory hunter. It wasn't a case of that. But I was there watching the team that I absolutely loved. And they won 5-1, which set me on the way. And it was something I'd never forget.
Great story. I always love hearing those first memory types of stories. So obviously you've been in the thick of it in terms of Manchester City and the Manchester City media scene. I'm interested in sort of your journey to becoming such a well-known journalist, especially again amongst the City faithful. I guess when did you first realize that journalism, and especially journalism on Manchester City is something that you wanted to do for a living? And when did you realize this actually may be a very plausible and possible career path for me?
It's a long story, really. I'll try and do it as briefly as I can. I mean, at school, I'd always been interested in English, so I'd enjoyed creative writing. I was an only child, so I was very shy, very quiet. So doing things creatively in my own head was very important. So therefore, imagination, and I used to pretend I was on the radio. I used to pretend I was on television, but not to anybody. I wasn't broadcasting, and I also had an absolute obsession with going to games. So from certainly 73, 74, when I became a season ticket holder, I desperately wanted to go to away games. And my mum died in 77, and she'd been very, very protective. And it was around about the time of her passing I started to go to away games. And basically, from that moment onwards, which you'd say was 75, 76, apart from these games behind closed doors and a handful of others while I was working at the BBC, I've attended every single City game, home and away. And through that passion and that obsession and trying to combine that with a normal job, I realised that the only way I was going to actually continue on with this obsession was to find a way to get paid to do it, or for it to become something else. So my wife was from Oldham. I moved to Oldham. I found out in Oldham, in Greater Manchester, there was a hospital radio station, a voluntary organisation that appealed to me because I could fulfil my attempts to do a bit of broadcasting without actually looking people's eyes, because I didn't have the confidence to do that. So you can pretend when you're in a room on your own that there's only you there.
Right.
So the combination of the two things led me to meeting a few people. I started commentating on Manchester City's club videos as a volunteer. That made me more contacts. Club Call came along and said, would I do some games for them? Because they'd heard me doing some stuff on hospital radio and doing the club video. And one thing led to another. It sounds easy, but it wasn't.
Right.
Suddenly I'm in a position where the BBC said to me, have you ever thought about applying for a job here? There's a vacancy coming up. And I thought, well, no, I haven't, but I will apply for it. And to my astonishment, I was offered the job. Then I was given the decision, well, you're going to have to miss some Manchester City games. We know you're obsessed. And I didn't really want to do that. But I spoke to a friend of mine who was a broadcaster who said, you might live to regret this if you don't take the chance and see if you can get that dream job. So I took the chance. I worked hard. I ducked and dived. I swapped every shift, so I'd miss hardly a single City game, no matter how inconvenient it was. I remember one particular week when I was on the early shift, so I'd started at 5 a.m., finished at 1. City were playing away at Southampton on the Tuesday night of that week. So I did the full shift from 5 a.m. till 1 o'clock, then drove down to Southampton as a fan, watched the game, got back at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and started work straight away again and did another shift from 5 till 1. And that just was an example of my commitment, if you like, to doing, still watching City. And then in 2001, I got the chance to do the job I'd always dreamed of. And from that point onwards, until fairly recently, I was the ball-by-ball commentator, as you'd call it, on every single game all over Europe, home and away. It was the dream job, and I fulfilled all my ambitions.
And I mean, so a couple of things. One, you mentioned earlier. What's that?
I turn my light on so that maybe you can see me a bit better.
Yeah, no, we could see you just fine, Ian. Thank you. But yeah, you said one thing in your answer there that I always try to highlight is that, you said, I think your words, I may be paraphrasing, but you said, it sounds easy, but it wasn't. And, anything, I think an important lesson for anyone, especially in this generation where everyone sort of wants everything really quickly, sort of instant gratification. I think it's very important to know, to realize that and notice and admit that that hard work, or that work, is going to be hard to come by. You got to sacrifice, have the 5 a.m. shift drive and then have the other, things like that. And it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, you've been doing this for what, 30, 40 years at this point. So it's not just a couple of years and you're there. So really interesting. And a reason why I wanted to have you on as well. Now, currently, you have the YouTube channel for Ian Cheeseman, Forever Blue. When did you start that? Why did you start that? And what type of content would people see if they visited your YouTube channel?
Basically, having done the dream job at the BBC from 2001 until 2017, something happened while I was working at the BBC, which I'm not going to go into the details of because it serves no purpose. But basically, I had a bit of a legal battle with them. I won my legal case and was, completely in the clear, as it were, but not after a fairly painful battle with my employers. So I was left in an untenable position, really, where I had to leave the dream job, which wasn't what I wanted to do. I could have carried on, actually, once everything was over with.
Right.
It just felt not the right thing to do, really. So I had to leave and find something new to do. And I was literally in the summer of 2017 talking to a couple of potential sponsors because I didn't know what I was going to do next. I knew that at my stage in life and with everything that had gone behind me, that I wanted to carry on being associated with City, and I certainly wasn't in the mood to give up my lifelong obsession, as City were getting into the best part of my time watching them. And I was talking to a potential sponsor who at the end of the conversation, he'd been very supportive. He said, "I presume you're going to America now, are you? City going there on pre-season on Monday." This was on a Friday. And I said, "Well, no, I'm not, because if I tell my wife that I'm suddenly going to spend a lot of money to go to America, she would be pretty annoyed with me." And he said, "Well, I think you should be there, and I think you should be carrying on doing what you're doing." He said, "I tell you what, I'll pay for you to go." And I went, "Wow." And it was like, so I was really flabbergasted. And he was as good as his word. He paid for everything: flights, hotels, hire car. I flew out to Houston on the Wednesday of the following week, the day of the game, I think it was, or maybe the day before. City played United in Houston. And when I got there, in fact, in the couple of days in between, I was saying, "Well, what shall I do when I get there?" And he said, "Well, why don't you start a YouTube channel or something?" And so I talked to my son, who's obviously younger than me, and said, "How do you do that, son? And, what should I do?" He said, "I'll set the account up for you." So while I was in the air, literally, when I landed at the other end, he said, "It's all set up now. Just send me videos back." So I thought, well, despite being in an industry which is, I suppose, all about ego and self-confidence, I didn't really want to just make it about me talking to the camera or it all being about me. I've always been a fan at heart, despite being a journalist. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to just tell people the story of the journey. I'm going to interview people. I'm going to talk to fellow fans. And that's what I did. And I started creating videos. My son edited it back in England. And from a standing start, people started to watch the videos. As the new season started back in England, I thought, well, I'll carry on doing these as an experiment, see if people keep watching. It was about the time Arsenal Fan TV was quite popular. And I was astounded, really, by the numbers of people who were watching my content, even though it wasn't contentious or clickbaitish or anything that like Arsenal Fan TV were doing. I mean, that's up to them what they do. I'm not knocking them, but mine certainly wasn't in the same way. It wasn't anti-City. It wasn't anti the managers. It was all real and ethical. Certainly, that was the way I wanted to do it. But I've managed to find one or two sponsors of people who were fellow Blues, who liked what I'd done in the past, who admired my career, and so therefore supported me in the way that the first guy had done, because they wanted to support me and not purely as a commercial decision. And that gave me the freedom then to carry on doing what I was doing and earn an income from it. Podcast was a natural thing for me to go into because I've done 30 odd years of radio.
Right.
Basically, a podcast is just radio pre-recorded on the air. So I started a podcast channel as well. I did some work on XS Manchester, and now I'm doing some work for a small radio station over here in Greater Manchester. And so, you know, that's how I got into it all. It's become a lot more difficult in COVID times because people, for a while I was doing it for City as well, believe it or not. They were paying me a fee to put some of my content on the club website.
Wow.
But they pulled the plug on that during the summer and said that COVID restrictions had meant that they had to do cost cutting.
Yeah.
So I was sort of basically told, thanks, but no more. So it's become a lot more difficult now to survive. I'm constantly trying to find people to work with on the same basis of trying to do it in an ethical way that's not about clickbait, not about sensationalism, and not just confrontational, but to try to find those people to support me is proving difficult. But you know, thankfully, I'm still doing stuff. I used to do a match day vlog literally at every single game, and I think people like the videos coming from the grounds, from especially the away games. I carried on at the end of last season doing them virtually in ways like this. We're doing it now, and that worked okay at the end of last season. But now this has become the new norm. I've decided to not carry on with those videos, A, because I haven't got any sponsorship for them, and B, I can see that the numbers generally of football channels have dropped a little. I think some people have fallen out of love with football behind closed doors. And partly because I don't offer anything quite as distinctive anymore, because anybody can do stuff like this on Zoom, but not so many people are doing it every single game, home and away, and prepared to have that commitment. So the uniqueness of what I was doing, you know, has changed a little. I've carried on with the podcasts. I started doing some work for Indian TV, Sony TV, who've sort of hired me as a City expert, which covers the whole of India, which is great.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just hoping other opportunities like that will come along. Just like I didn't expect to get a call just over 12 months ago from Vincent Company saying, "Do you want to write a book with me about the quadruple season?" So I'm hoping things like that will come along in the future as well, and just keep doing what I love to do. It's very selfish in a way, but I just want to be paid to watch City.
I mean, I think that, call it selfish or not, I think it's every person's right to try to do what they love to do, and have a living at it. Talk to me about Vincent Company, though. I totally forgot to mention that in the introduction. What was it like working with him? He seems like a great guy.
He's an exemplary fellow. I've got not a bad word to say about him. I was disappointed, if I'm being honest, about the whole process of writing that book, because I wasn't given very long to write it, which is fair enough. I mean, they wanted to get it out quickly, but I thought I'd have more access to Vincent. I went out to Holland. I stayed in the Anderlecht team hotel for a week with them while they were pre-season training, and in my mind, I imagined that in the evenings, after he'd done the training during the daytime, I might get 4 or 5 hours with him each night for 4 nights, and that would have given me probably most of the material that I needed. But the end result was that I got sort of 3 hours with him in total in the week, and then was expected to write a 50,000 word book in his words about the previous season. Well, you don't need to do much mathematics to work out that was virtually impossible. I begged and begged and begged for a bit more access, and got an hour and a half long telephone call with him. When I got back, but the truth is that probably 50%, if not more, of that book, which is supposedly all in his words, at least 50% are in my words, trying to second guess what he would say.
Right.
Nobody's come back to me and said that they think there's anything wrong with any of it, so therefore I must have got it right. And I think it's sold pretty well. But I would have hoped for more access, but he's a busy man. He was player manager at Anderlecht. He is a proper gentleman, an exemplary guy. But the whole process is not quite what people think it would be. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha. Before we get into the actual City team this year, I'm always curious to talk to fans of the quote unquote Big Six, and especially a team like City, because basically before Cheeseman came in, For those of you who don't know, I mean, Manchester City, I think they were in League One in the late '90s or early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, this is a proud club, a big club, but nowhere near the size of where it is today. Um, Coming from someone who obviously has experienced both cities, as it were. Um, I mean, obviously the winning must be awesome to witness. Premier League titles, challenging for Champions League, not quite getting there yet. FA Cups, League Cups, etc. Um, do you ever miss the old city ever, or is it okay that all this money has poured into the team because there have been results for City that otherwise, maybe wouldn't have come?
Listen, the Aguero goal in 2012 when City won the league was probably the standout moment in my career,
Mm-hmm.
one of the standout moments of my life, and I'm so glad that came along. But I knew that 11 years ago, perhaps slightly more now, when the Sheikh took over, that City were on a rocket ride that would lead to success, would lead to fantastic players, great games, and for my career, wow, it put City on the map and helped me tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
But I also knew that there was a penalty ultimately to pay for that, in that you lose the humanity, and City are becoming a global phenomenon. The owners now have a string of clubs all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
You can see their interest in Messi. Why are they wanting to bring Messi in? He'll probably come next summer, £2 million a week. They're not bringing him in because they think he's still the player he was at his peak. They're bringing him in because he's a worldwide brand, which
Mm-hmm.
helps to expand Manchester City even more. And when the moment comes along that a European Super League is in existence, which seems to get ever nearer, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that Manchester City, although they've kept quiet so far, will be one of the clubs that want to be part of that. Is that what I want as a fan? Probably not. Do I envy clubs? And I don't say this patronisingly, because I think you'll find a lot of City fans have a lot of affection for West Ham. They're a club we identify with. They are real fans. I mean, back in the 70s, I can remember going to Upton Park, and it was a pretty rough place to go,
Yeah.
and quite a frightening place to go. But I think that it's working class fan base, and it's in touch with reality. Gives it an identity and a camaraderie between City fans and West Ham. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here when I say that we have, most of us, a soft spot for West Ham. And so I envy you, really, as a club now. You might, on the other hand, wish that you were in my position, but there's part of me that wishes that I was still in your position, with a club that is still essentially, a fans club. Because, of course, with the success comes glory hunters, and comes a different type of fan base who
Yeah.
get very greedy, really. So when City have an off day, there's a part of the fans, and obviously I'm one of those, the older fans, who will say, come on, the third in the league, the second in the league, they just got knocked out in a semi-final. We'd have dreamed of that when we were playing Macclesfield Town and York City in League One. And now you expect that, expect us to beat United, expect us to beat Liverpool, put 5 past West Ham. Remember where you've come from,
Mm.
and the teasing that comes from fans of the Liverpool and United fan base is very much, you've got no history. Well, no, we have a rich history, a very rich history. In fact, there were times, since the Second World War, when Manchester City have been the bigger club in Manchester, have had more fans. When United were playing their home games at Main Road because Old Trafford got bombed during the war.
Yeah.
And so there is a very rich history. If you only define history by the number of trophies you've got, then City's history is not as rich as Liverpool's, as United, clearly. But if you want to look at the history of a football club, then most clubs actually have a fantastic history. Just like individual people have fantastic stories to tell. I mean, one of the things I've loved doing in my years in broadcasting is to, like you're doing now, is to chat to people and get stories from them. And you know what? You could practically, I believe, you could practically pick an individual off the street who you know nothing about and sit down and do a fascinating hour's life story with every single one of them, because we all have fascinating life stories. And so that applies to football clubs as well. I'm proud of my club, you're proud of your club, and so you should be. And I don't look down on your club or think I'm better than you as a fan or our club's better than your. I think we're all part of a football family. And I loved Main Road. I loved the days when, you know, tickets were easier to come by for everybody who was a real fan who wanted to go. Tickets are harder to come by because a bigger proportion of tickets go to corporates or people traveling from abroad or on package tours or whatever. And you could get to know players a little bit. You could get, I mean, I've got good relationships with lots of the former players, but none of them. I mean, even with the Vincent Kompany book, right? I wrote a book with him, spent a week in the camp with him. I haven't got his phone number. I have no direct line of contact with him. It was all I could do to try to get, when I got the book eventually published, you know, I had to go through a third party to say, please, could you get him to sign my copy of the book? You know, and could he get me a couple of others? Well, he signed one for me, but I didn't get any others. But if this had been a former player, Colin Bell, I wrote Colin Bell's book, The Greatest Player That's Ever Played for the Club. I've spent hours and hours and hours at his house, one-to-one with him, writing that book, traveled all over the country with him. I can pick up the phone to him right now. Well, actually, sadly, he's in hospital at the moment. He's been suffering from an illness. But, you know, at a normal time, I could just ring him up and have a chat to him, you know, as much as I wanted to. That's not going to happen with the modern footballers. And the bigger football gets, the more it goes away from the fans. So, yeah, I've enjoyed the success, but there are definitely things about the old days that I miss terribly.
Yeah, there's a price to pay, like you said. There are pros and cons. Myself, as a younger fan and also a fan from the United States, I envy the older generation. I envy you being able to go to Main Road, which, by the way, just like that big stand, I don't know if it was the East or West stand, just like the big stand relative to like the rest of the other parts of the state. I just like the way Main Road looked. Just side note, one of my favorite looking stadiums. But I'm never going to be able to go to Upton Park again. I'm never going to be able to walk down Green Street and go to a game. I thankfully went once, and it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. But I'm never going to be able to go again. I'll always love West Ham, but I do envy those that grew up with it, had more access to it, because the game is changing. Money is coming into it. And is it going to ruin it? For some, but change is coming, and it's going to be different, and it may not be the same, may not be as good. So it's just, like I said, I love hearing people who are fans of clubs, especially clubs that have changed so much, like City, talking about before and after. So thank you for that. But let's get into the current City team. I want to talk about the transfer business. You guys have had a couple, big players leave. Otamendi left. I think the biggest one is Leroy Sané to Bayern Munich. You guys have had a couple of good signings too. Ruben Diaz, Ferran Torres, Nathan Ake from Bournemouth. Overall, what are your thoughts of City's transfer business in the quote unquote summer window? And are there any more? I mean, I guess the window's shut now, but are there any more holes in the squad that do need to be filled in January?
I think the loss of Leroy Sané to Bayern Munich was a real blow. I think he's an absolutely sensational player, blessed with tremendous pace. What went on there, whether it's to do with just homesick, his ambitions to play for Germany, whether he had a falling out with Pep, nobody will really know. But I think he's a huge loss. Torres is as much as his goal was good last night, as we speak in against Porto, is still a long way to go to prove to be in that level of quality to me. the trouble is now, and I say this honestly, is that judging individual players, especially the new ones, obviously Ake is one, Ruben Diaz, and then Torres. I find it a lot harder to do now. As a fan who spent my whole life attending games, now watching them through the letterbox shaped version of it on TV.
Yeah.
I was only watching the game last night and thinking, I wish I could see what Ruben Diaz is doing now while we're attacking. Is he organising? What position he is on the edge of the penalty area? But of course, I'm not allowed to see that. The television's only showing me the attack or the close-up of the ball. So people asking me what I thought of Diaz, Torres and Ake, I'm finding a lot harder to make that judgment now. I make no bones about it. Only seeing the games on TV, because I'm not one of the small number of journalists that's allowed to go into City's first team games. I would normally say give it 5 or 10 games anyway, and we're not into that sort of numbers. But those are the prerequisites I put on the judgment. Vincent Kompany was an immense character and leader and defender. So if Ruben Diaz can prove to be as good as him, he was at fault, I feel, for the goal yesterday that City conceded, and made another mistake that could have seriously cost City a goal. But then it was only one game. I'd like to think he will make it. Ake, I've seen playing for Bournemouth. He's a nice footballer. He fits into Pep's model of playing quite well, but I don't see him as being a dynamic defender. But then City don't seem to go in for dynamic defenders; they go in for footballers in every position. And Torres is a young prospect. City need a striker. Aguero is getting older. He's more injury prone, and Jesus, who's been given opportunities to play in that role, isn't quite to the same standard. He's a very good player, but he isn't quite at the Sergio Aguero standard. And I would still say that City have a problem at left back. Cancelo plays at left back. Of course, he did that last night on a sort of wing back role, if you like. Mendy is the recognised left back. He's never lived up to the expectations, even before the injury that he got. So I still think that's a problem. But if I was to pick out the single biggest problem, which would be seen as quite controversial to City fans, I would say the biggest single problem City have got is the holding midfield role. I think Yaya Toure was immense, a brilliant, brilliant player. Fernandinho, fit and at his best, a very, very good player, almost the standard of Yaya Toure. I'm afraid that Rodri is nowhere near that standard. And I think that's where City have slipped in the whole of last season and the beginning of this. And I think that's why they're not at the level they were 2 years ago. If I was to single out one player, I don't mean that in a cruel way. I'm sure that Rodri is a lovely fella, and I certainly don't mean any ill to him personally. But I have to assess what I see in front of me, and I don't see Rodri as being the same quality as the two previous incumbents. And I think he goes missing, and he's slow at turning, slow at recovering, and I think that's City's biggest area of problem, actually.
Yeah, and I will say, segueing into the next topic, you guys have 2 wins, a loss, and a draw, so 7 points from your first 4 league games. I wouldn't say you guys have really blown anyone out of the water. The Leeds match was a fantastic match to watch. Didn't blow Leeds out of the water. I did not watch the Arsenal match, but from all accounts, it seems like, it was a good solid win, but nothing too dominant like we did see of City 2 years ago. You guys are still playing well, but again, City's expectations are so high now. How do you assess, the first 4 matches in the league, or just, sort of the performance so far in all competitions? How do you assess it? I've been trying to figure out what the reasoning is for City not quite meeting those expectations. Is it the loss of David Silva? Is it the shortened off season? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, clearly, the absence of Kevin De Bruyne in a couple of games has been key. Sergio Aguero's back, but not fully fit yet. You can't lose 2 players like that and not miss them. But 2 years ago, when City hit 100 points, and the year after that, when they were nip and tuck with Liverpool and went on that great run to win it at the end of the season, the standard overall of the team was, in my opinion, a lot higher. I think as Company went, as David Silva went, as Sane went, we have seen a little decline in the quality of the players individually. I think that's part of it. I think City's game is all about dominating possession. So therefore, against the majority of opponents who don't really challenge that effectively, City will have 75 to 80% of possession, therefore limiting the number of opportunities that they have to finish. So if that other team isn't very good at counter-attacking or just taking those one or two chances, City eventually will overwhelm them, and quite often you'll see them win 4-5-0 quite a lot of the games. When it comes to the real big games, like the latter stages of the Champions League, like the FA Cup semi-final, like the derby matches or games against Liverpool. And in the old days when we used to have crowds, which made a big difference, a trip to West Ham, trip to Sheffield United, trip to Leeds would be trickier than they now are in empty stadiums. I think, City have, I mean, this is two answers in one, really. It feels to me as if City's way of playing, which is this sort of training ground, zipping it around, just keeping possession and taking no risks, suits the current behind closed doors situation. But I also think that when it comes to the real crunch times, that's when they get exposed. And you can have a fabulous season, get to the quarterfinals, the semi-finals of the Champions League, semi-finals of the FA Cup, finish second or third in the league, but not quite be good enough. And I think that's what City are. They're not quite good enough because they've become a little bit too samey, and some teams are able to exploit that. I don't know what I'm to expect from West Ham at the weekend, because we saw them come back brilliantly against Spurs.
Mm-hmm.
That they have shown that in certain situations they can be very, very good. But equally, generally, City's results against West Ham have been very good, and West Ham have been, quite weak, if I'm being honest, against City. So do I expect West Ham on their own ground, as I say, perhaps that doesn't matter anymore, but on their own ground to be a bit more of a tough proposition? Will they have gained confidence from what happened to them last weekend? Or will City just steamroller them in the way that they have done before? They'll make changes because they play again on Tuesday in the Champions League. And that's where Pep at the moment wants to put his priorities a little bit. So
Yeah.
you'll see Foden obviously start against West Ham. John Stones may feature. He may rest Sergio Aguero. That is possible. I doubt he'd want to rush back Kevin De Bruyne, even though he's trained this week, or Nathan Ake. He might bring them on for half an hour or play them for 60 minutes, but I think he'll be easing players like that back in. So you will see what I'd consider a slightly weaker City team against West Ham. But what I can't gauge, the bit that's impossible for me to gauge, is what am I going to see from West Ham?
Yeah, I mean, it's always very hard for us to gauge as well. You sort of never know which West Ham you're going to see. And just even within the Spurs match itself, you saw, a tale of two halves, a tale of two West Hams. Yes or no question, Ian. With Van Dijk's injury, are City title favorites?
It certainly weakens. Liverpool, that's for sure. Although I've got to say, perhaps I go against the tide for this, because he was the Player of the Year last year, wasn't he? World Player of the Year or whatever. I think Van Dijk is slightly overrated, but clearly he is seen as a key player to them. How they respond to that now, and whether they were going to do it for Virgil or blimey, now we haven't got him anymore, we don't know for a week or two now, to see how they react to it. I don't see the other teams in the title race as being particularly much better than they were. United are a little bit better. They showed that with the win at PSG. But obviously you don't lose 6-1 at home and be serious title contenders, albeit that City lost 5-2 at home to Leicester. Chelsea seem to be very inconsistent. So it does look as if really it is only Liverpool or City. So I'd say it's a hard one to call at the moment, especially because of this behind the closed doors thing. Because I just think it makes a big difference to football generally. I mean, I'm just not enjoying. I mean, as much as I'm an obsessed fan going home and away all these years, if I'm really being honest, I don't enjoy watching the games nowhere near as much. I mean, I know watching the games, the majority of them on TV from far afield, like you do.
Yeah.
You might argue it's not a lot different, but it's certainly
Right.
hugely different for me. And even if I was watching them at home, I would be able to tell that the tension that a crowd provides has gone, and the way games are being played is very, very different. I'm very lucky because I've been able to attend a few games behind closed doors at smaller clubs like Oldham Athletic and Wigan Athletic. And when I have gone along to these games behind closed doors, I can certainly see with my own eyes that their games are very different. So it's a tough one, and this will sound very strange to say as well. I'm not sure as a match attending fan as I am, that I really want to see City succeed that much while I'm not able to go, because when they got close to the Champions League last year, I found myself thinking, what if they get to the final? What if they win it? What's that going to feel like? I've spent my whole life dreaming of that. Imagine if they were to win the Champions League in an empty stadium and I couldn't go. Now, that might sound like a very selfish thing to say, but it affected how I watched the game, and there's a bit of me that was quite glad that they got knocked out. What a terrible thing to say, but I just couldn't face the thought of not being able to go to a game like that, which could have been the biggest in City's history.
Yeah, I mean that's a valid argument, and yeah, coming from an American viewer, yeah, it's maybe not as different as a person like you who attended thousands and thousands of games. But I will say that I do miss the fan TV, like the YouTube accounts, like the fan TV accounts interviewing fans, like sort of similar to what you're doing, like match day vlogs. A lot of that's gone right now. I do miss that. So while it's maybe not as big of a difference for me as it is for you, there still is a bit of a difference, and I can't wait for fans to be allowed back in the stadiums. So we talked a little about this before we started recording. I know you don't do predictions. So first of all, I'd like to ask you why you don't do predictions. Is it a superstitious thing, or?
I think it's impossible to predict the outcome of football matches. I just said I don't know what to expect from West Ham, so how can I give any sort of valid predictions of the game? And whenever you do make a prediction, it usually comes back to bite you. So if I was to do it, I ask fans like this a lot of time in the vlogs that I've done in the past, what do you think the score's going to be? And then, well, I don't actually ask them the score. What do you think the game's going to be like today? And they'll often volunteer a score. And they'll go, oh, yeah, we're going to win 5-0 today. And then they get ridiculed afterwards because they were confident. And if they say, no, we're going to lose today, then their fellow fans ridicule them for being so negative. So I've just learned to just say, well, I hope City win at West Ham. I think they're capable of it, but who knows?
I got you. Well, I always do a prediction, so I'm going to keep the train rolling. I'm going to say City will win. I think City will win 3-1. That's my prediction. Hopefully I'm wrong, but we'll see. So Ian, I think we'll wrap it up here. Honestly, very, very thankful and grateful for you coming on. Learned a lot. It was great to get your perspective on everything City and just the history of the club. Definitely would love to do this for the reverse fixture as well. Hopefully fans are, or at least some fans are, packing the stadiums by then. But again, Ian, really, really appreciate the time. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.